My parents used me as proof they were good people, but never treated me like a son. Hey everyone, before we get in the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is Kevin, and I'm 24 years old. If you had asked me to describe my parents during my childhood, I would have painted you a picture of perfection. They were the kind of people who seemed to have stepped out of a parenting magazine, always volunteering at school, organizing community events, and receiving awards for their dedication to youth programs. Our home was filled with plaques and photographs of them shaking hands with politicians, standing with other distinguished community members, or accepting certificates of appreciation. To the outside world, they were saints. But inside our house, behind the closed doors that no one else ever saw behind, a different reality existed. I was an accessory to their public image, a prop in their performance as ideal parents. They didn't ask about my day unless they needed material for their next speech. They didn't comfort me when I cried unless someone was watching. I was invisible unless I could enhance their reputation. My earliest memories are of being dressed in perfectly coordinated outfits for public appearances. I remember the scratchy collars and polished shoes that never fit quite right. I remember standing beside them at charity events, smiling until my cheeks hurt while they delivered speeches about the importance of family values and nurturing children. Afterward, in the car, the silence would be deafening. No one would mention my good behavior or the fact that I had stood still for 2 hours without complaint. The performance was over, and so was their interest in me. At home, their attention was conditional and transactional. They praised my academic achievements not because they were proud of me, but because my report cards served as evidence of their excellent parenting. My science fair trophy sat prominently in the living room, not because they cared about my experiment on plant growth, but because visitors would see it and comment on what bright parents they must have. When I brought home a B in mathematics once, the reaction wasn't disappointment in my performance. It was anger that their image might be tarnished. I learned quickly that my value to them was measured in public perception. If I won the spelling bee, they would invite everyone over for a celebration where they subtly highlighted how their teaching methods had contributed to my success. If I failed to make the soccer team, the house would be tense for days, not because I was disappointed, but because they had already told their friends I was a shoo-in. Their parenting philosophy seemed to be, appearances matter more than reality. They never hit me or screamed obscenities. Those things would leave marks that people might see. Instead, they perfected the art of emotional neglect disguised as high standards. They provided everything money could buy: private tutors, expensive gadgets, brand-name clothing, but none of the things that actually mattered: genuine interest, emotional support, or unconditional love. As I grew older, I began to notice the pattern more clearly. They would attend every parent-teacher conference not to discuss my progress, but to ensure the teacher knew how involved they were. They would volunteer to chaperone field trips, not to spend time with me, but to demonstrate their commitment to education to other parents. Every action was calculated, every moment with me a potential photo opportunity for their mental scrapbook of perfect parenting. The strangest part was how everyone else saw them. Teachers praised their involvement. Other parents admired their dedication. Community leaders recognized them with awards for their selfless contributions. No one seemed to notice that their son was often standing just outside the frame, watching them perform for an audience that never questioned the authenticity of their devotion. By the time I entered middle school, I had become an expert at playing my role in their theater of parenthood. I knew when to smile, when to speak about my supportive parents, and when to step aside so they could take the spotlight. I had learned that my needs were secondary to their image, my feelings irrelevant unless they could be woven into one of their anecdotes about parenting success. I was living a double life: the cherished son in public, the invisible child at home. And I was beginning to wonder which version was real, or if either of them was. Middle school brought new challenges and new opportunities for my parents to showcase their parenting prowess. They enrolled me in every academic competition imaginable, not because I showed particular interest or talent, but because winning these contests added another layer to their carefully constructed image as parents of a gifted child. Our dining room table became a command center for my education, covered in practice tests, flashcards, and schedules that left no room for actual family meals or conversation. The pressure intensified as I entered my teenage years. My parents began to strategically position themselves in school committees and parent-teacher associations, ensuring they had direct access to information about my performance that they could later share selectively with their social circle. They never missed an awards ceremony, but they also never missed an opportunity to remind me that my achievements reflected directly on them. The subtext was always clear: succeed for us, not for yourself. High school became their ultimate stage. They volunteered for every school event, organized fundraisers, and made themselves indispensable to the school administration. Teachers loved them, administrators praised them, and other parents either admired or envied their dedication. But I saw what others didn't: the way they would subtly steer conversations toward my accomplishments, the practiced humility as they accepted compliments on my behalf, the way they positioned themselves as experts on raising successful children. What nobody saw was the emotional vacuum at home. My parents didn't know my favorite band, my closest friends, or what I hoped to do after graduation unless it enhanced their narrative. They attended my football games, not to cheer me on, but to network with other parents in the stands. They helped me with college applications, not to support my future, but to ensure I would attend a prestigious university that would reflect well on their parenting credentials. The summer before my senior year, I received an invitation to attend a National Youth Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C. I was genuinely excited about the opportunity to meet students from across the country and learn about government firsthand. When I told my parents, their eyes lit up with a familiar gleam, not of pride in my accomplishment, but of recognition of a new opportunity for them to shine. Within hours, they had contacted the conference organizers, offering to speak about their innovative parenting approach that had led to my selection. They booked themselves into the same hotel, planned networking events with other parents, and arranged meetings with their congressional representatives, all under the guise of supporting me. The conference, which should have been my moment to step into the spotlight, became just another stage for their performance. In Washington, I watched as they worked the room with practiced ease, dropping my name and achievements into conversations like currency. They collected business cards, took photos with important-looking people, and made plans to collaborate with other elite parents on future projects. I spent most of the conference alone, wandering through museums and monuments while they attended exclusive parent receptions and workshops. One evening, I returned to our hotel room to find them entertaining a group of influential parents they had met at the conference. They were laughing and sharing stories about their parenting journeys, each trying to outdo the others with tales of their children's successes. When I entered, my father immediately called me over to demonstrate a special technique he used to help me study for exams, a method we had never actually used together. I played along, reciting the lines he had fed me countless times before, while the other parents nodded appreciatively and took notes. Later that night, as I lay in bed listening to them plan how to leverage their new connections, I realized something profound. They didn't see me as their son at all. I was a project, an investment, a living testament to their superiority as parents. My achievements were their achievements, my successes their successes. But my struggles, my fears, my dreams, those are mine alone, and they had no interest in them unless they could be repackaged for public consumption. The realization didn't come as a shock. I had known it intuitively for years, but seeing it so clearly in that hotel room in Washington, D.C. gave it a new weight. For the first time, I began to actively resent their use of me as proof of their goodness. I started to question whether I had any genuine accomplishments or if everything I had achieved was simply an extension of their ambitions. As we prepared to return home, my mother handed me a stack of brochures for Ivy League schools she had collected from other parents. She had already highlighted statistics about acceptance rates and notable alumni, completely ignoring the fact that I had expressed interest in attending a state university with a strong engineering program. When I tried to explain my preferences, she waved away my concerns with the assurance that she knew what was best for my future, and by extension, for her social standing. That night, I lay awake wondering if I would ever escape the role they had written for me. Was I destined to forever be the supporting actor in their story of perfect parenthood? Or could I somehow find a way to write my own script, separate from their expectations and ambitions? The answer, I would discover, would come sooner than I expected, and it would change everything about our relationship and my understanding of family. The college application process became a battleground for control over my future. My parents had mapped out a precise trajectory for me: an Ivy League education followed by law school, then a position at a prestigious firm where I could continue to enhance their reputation through my professional success. They had even selected specific extracurricular activities they believed would strengthen my applications, not based on my interests, but on what would look most impressive to admissions committees. What they failed to understand was that years of being treated as an accessory to their public image had ignited in me a quiet rebellion. I began to secretly research schools that aligned with my actual interests in computer science and engineering, far from the prestigious institutions they had selected for me. I filled out applications in the school computer lab during lunch periods, using a separate email account they couldn't access. Each time I clicked submit on an application they hadn't approved, I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with guilt, a complicated cocktail of emotions that would define my relationship with them for years to come. When acceptance letters began arriving, the tension in our house reached unprecedented levels. I had been accepted to several of their preferred schools, but I had also received offers from 2 state universities with highly regarded engineering programs. The day I received a full scholarship to one of these schools, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I had an option that would allow me to pursue my own path without financial dependence on them, a true escape route. The day I planned to tell them my decision, I came home to find them hosting a celebration with friends and family. They had assumed I would choose their top-ranked university and had already ordered custom-made sweatshirts and banners with the school's logo. As I stood in the doorway watching them toast to my bright future at an institution I had no intention of attending, I realized how completely they had projected their own desires onto me. In their minds, there was no possibility that I might choose differently. That evening, after the guests had left, I sat them down in the living room, the same room where they had displayed my trophies and certificates like hunting trophies. I explained calmly that I had decided to accept the scholarship to the state university and pursue engineering instead of pre-law. The silence that followed was heavier than any I had experienced before. They didn't yell or cry. They simply stared at me with expressions of disbelief and betrayal. My father spoke first, his voice dangerously quiet. He explained how this decision would reflect poorly on them in their social circles, how they had already shared my acceptance to the prestigious university with their colleagues and friends. He spoke not of my happiness or future success, but of the inconvenience my choice would cause them personally and socially. My mother followed with a lecture on ingratitude, reminding me of everything they had sacrificed for my education, sacrifices that, in reality, had been investments in their own social capital. The conversation deteriorated from there. They accused me of being selfish, of throwing away opportunities they had worked so hard to provide, of embarrassing them in front of their community. When I tried to explain that I needed to follow my own path and study something I was passionate about, they dismissed my feelings as teenage rebellion that would pass. They couldn't comprehend that I might have interests and ambitions separate from theirs. The following weeks were characterized by what I can only describe as emotional warfare. They refused to help me prepare for college, hoping I would fail or change my mind. They forgot to mail important documents, scheduled family events on orientation days, and made it clear that my decision had deeply disappointed them. Yet they never stopped performing for others. When friends asked about my college plans, they would smile and say how proud they were of my independence, while shooting me looks of disapproval when no one was watching. What they didn't anticipate was the freedom that came with their disapproval. For the first time, I was making decisions based on my own desires rather than their expectations. I researched my major, joined online forums of prospective students, and began to envision a future that was truly mine. Each step toward independence was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The summer before I left for college, my parents made one last attempt to maintain control. They offered to buy me a car if I would agree to transfer to their preferred university after the first semester. They promised to pay for a luxury apartment near campus if I would major in business instead of engineering. They even suggested I could live at home and commute to the state university, ensuring I remained under their influence. Each offer was carefully crafted to appeal to my practical needs while undermining my autonomy. I refused each offer, explaining that I needed to stand on my own feet and make my own mistakes. This response seemed to genuinely confuse them. They couldn't understand why I would choose hardship over comfort, independence over their guidance. What they failed to recognize was that their guidance had always been self-serving, and their comfort had come with invisible strings attached. The day I left for college was strangely anticlimactic. They helped me load my belongings into the car, drove me to campus, and helped me unpack in silence. As they prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside and whispered that if I ever needed anything, or if I came to my senses about my college choice, I should call them immediately. There was no hug, no expression of pride or love, just a final attempt to maintain their position as my saviors. As I watched their car disappear down the tree-lined street, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, fear, sadness, and hope. I was finally free from their direct influence, but I was also alone in a way I had never been before. The next 4 years would test my resolve, challenge my assumptions about family, and ultimately lead me to a confrontation with my parents that would change our relationship forever. College became my sanctuary and my testing ground. For the first time, I could explore my interests without the constant scrutiny and judgment of my parents. I threw myself into computer science and engineering courses, discovering a natural aptitude and genuine passion that surprised even me. The late-night coding sessions, complex problem sets, and collaborative projects weren't burdens to be endured for future rewards. They were challenges I embraced with enthusiasm. What I didn't anticipate was how deeply my parents' conditioning had affected me. Without their constant direction, I initially struggled with decision-making. Simple choices about which courses to take or which clubs to join felt monumental. I had spent so long following their script that I had lost touch with my own preferences and instincts. It took months of conscious effort to reconnect with myself and learn to trust my own judgment. During my first semester, I joined the robotics club on a whim, drawn by the colorful posters advertising competitions and the promise of building something tangible. The club became my first true community, a group of students who share my interests and accepted me without any expectations about my background or family connections. For the first time, I was Kevin, the engineering student with a knack for programming, not Kevin, the son of the community's perfect parents. My parents maintained their distance initially, perhaps hoping I would fail and return to their fold. But when I made the dean's list first semester and was selected for a prestigious research internship, they couldn't resist reasserting their involvement. They began calling more frequently, not to ask how I was doing, but to gather information they could share with their social circle. They sent care packages filled with items they could tell their friends they had provided, always including something with their preferred university's logo as a subtle reminder of their original plan. The internship became a particular point of contention. I was working with a professor on developing assistive technology for people with disabilities, a project that genuinely excited me and aligned with my desire to create things that could help others. When my parents learned about the internship, they immediately contacted the university to arrange a photo opportunity with the department chair. They showed up unannounced one day, dressed in business attire, and asked to tour the facilities where I worked. I watched in mortification as they complimented the professor on the program, subtly inserting comments about how they had always encouraged my interest in technology and social responsibility. They took photos with equipment I had helped build, posting them online with captions about supporting their son's innovative work. The professor, who had become something of a mentor to me, seemed confused by their performance, but remained professional throughout the visit. After they left, he asked me about my relationship with them. I found myself explaining, perhaps for the first time to someone who might understand, the complex dynamic of our family. He listened thoughtfully, then shared something that would stick with me for years. Sometimes the people who look like they have it all figured out are the most lost. Your path is your own, Kevin. Don't let anyone else write your story. My parents' attempts to co-opt my college experience intensified as I continued to succeed. They arranged to be guest speakers at a parent weekend event, where they presented on nurturing independence while maintaining family values, a topic they had little practical experience with but could discuss with theoretical authority. They networked with university administrators, collecting business cards, and establishing connections that might benefit them professionally. The breaking point came during my junior year, when I was offered a position with a tech startup developing educational software for underserved communities. The position was unpaid, but came with valuable experience and the potential for future employment. I was excited about the opportunity to apply my skills to something meaningful, but my parents saw only the lack of immediate prestige and financial reward. They flew to campus to discuss my decision, bringing with them a job offer from a family friend's prestigious consulting firm. The offer came with a substantial salary and clear path to advancement, everything they valued in a career. They couldn't comprehend why I would choose unpaid work over such a lucrative opportunity, especially when it meant turning down a connection that could enhance their social standing. Our conversation took place in a coffee shop near campus, a neutral territory that did nothing to soften their disapproval. They presented logical arguments about financial security and career advancement, but beneath their reasoning lay a clear message. My choices continued to reflect on them, and I was making them look bad by choosing passion over prestige. When I explained that I found the startup's mission compelling and wanted to contribute to something I believed in, my father dismissed my idealism as youthful naivety. My mother took a different approach, suggesting that I could work at the consulting firm for a few years to establish myself before pursuing more altruistic interests. Neither could accept that I might have different values than theirs. The discussion ended without resolution, but with a clear understanding between us. I would follow my own path, and they would distance themselves from it. They left campus that day with cold expressions and formal goodbyes. The following months brought minimal contact, only occasional calls that felt more like fact-finding missions than genuine attempts at connection. What surprised me most was how little their disapproval hurt this time. Perhaps it was the support of my college community, the mentorship of my professors, or simply the growing confidence that came from making my own decisions. I accepted the position with the startup and threw myself into the work, finding fulfillment in creating tools that could genuinely help students learn. As my college graduation approached, I received an email from my mother asking if they could attend the ceremony. She mentioned that several of their friends would be there and didn't want to have to explain my absence. The message was clear. My graduation wasn't about celebrating my achievement. It was about maintaining appearances. I agreed, not because I wanted them there, but because I had learned to choose my battles carefully. The day of graduation, as I stood in my cap and gown waiting to receive my diploma, I spotted them in the crowd, dressed impeccably and chatting with other parents as if nothing had changed. They smiled and waved when they saw me looking their way, performing the role of proud parents for an audience that had no idea about the reality of our relationship. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about my parents. Their performance wasn't just for others, it was for themselves. They had played the roles of perfect parents for so long that they had come to believe their own press releases, blind to the emotional neglect that lay beneath their carefully constructed image. As I walked across the stage to accept my diploma, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never again allow someone else to define my worth or direct my path. The years ahead would bring new challenges in my relationship with my parents, but I would face them with the confidence that comes from knowing who you are and what you value. Knowledge that no amount of public recognition or external validation can replace. The first year after graduation brought unexpected challenges as I navigated early adulthood while still entangled in my parents' web of expectations. The startup I had joined flourished, and my role evolved from intern to full-time developer with increasing responsibilities. I was proud of the work we were doing, creating accessible educational tools for students with learning disabilities, and I found genuine satisfaction in seeing our products make a real difference in classrooms across the country. My parents, meanwhile, maintained a careful distance. They rarely called, and when they did, the conversations were stilted and superficial. They never asked about my work or my life, only occasionally inquiring about my salary or living situation in ways that suggested they were gathering information for their social narratives rather than expressing genuine interest. I had almost grown accustomed to this emotional distance when they suddenly reappeared in my life with a request that would test the boundaries of our relationship. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was leaving the office. My mother's voice was unusually warm as she inquired about my health and work before getting to the real purpose of her call. They had been nominated for a Family of the Year award by a local charity organization they supported, and they needed my help with the application process. The award, they explained, would recognize their decades of community service and their exemplary parenting, a narrative they had carefully crafted over the years. I listened in disbelief as they outlined their plan. They wanted me to write a personal essay about how their parenting had shaped my success, highlighting specific examples of their guidance and support. They offered to provide talking points and even suggested we stage some family photographs to accompany the application. The request was so audacious, so completely disconnected from our reality, that I almost laughed. When I hesitated, my father got on the phone and explained that this award wasn't just about recognition. It came with a substantial grant they could direct to the charity of their choice, enhancing their standing in the community. He appealed to my sense of duty, reminding me that their reputation reflected on me as well. The implication was clear. By helping them, I was helping myself. I agreed to consider their request, though I had no intention of writing the false narrative they wanted. That night, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to expose them for the frauds they were, to finally reveal the truth behind their perfect family facade. Another part of me, the part that had been conditioned since childhood to seek their approval, wondered if this was an opportunity to finally earn their genuine love and acceptance. The following weekend, I drove to their house to discuss the award application. I found them in the living room, surrounded by photo albums and newspaper clippings documenting their community involvement and my achievements. They had already drafted a narrative of our family life that bore little resemblance to my memories. Supportive parents who had nurtured their son's talents while teaching him the importance of giving back to the community. As they presented their version of our story, something inside me shifted. Years of suppressed feelings rose to the surface. Anger, resentment, sadness, and a profound sense of loss. I listened until they finished, then took a deep breath and began to speak. I didn't shout or accuse. I simply told them my truth, calmly and clearly. I described what it was like to grow up as a prop in their performance of parenthood. I shared specific memories of being dressed up for public appearances, of my achievements being displayed like trophies, of my feelings being ignored unless they could be used to enhance their reputation. I explained how their conditional love had shaped my understanding of self-worth, how I had spent years believing I was only valuable when I was successful in ways that reflected well on them. As I spoke, their expressions shifted from confusion to defensiveness, then to a form of denial that bordered on disbelief. They couldn't, or wouldn't, see the disconnect between their intentions and their impact. They had performed the role of good parents for so long that they had convinced themselves it was real, blind to the emotional neglect that lay beneath their carefully constructed image. The conversation escalated as they defended themselves against my accusations. They listed their sacrifices, their community contributions, the material advantages they had provided me. They couldn't understand why I wasn't grateful, why I was rewriting history with these negative recollections. The more they defended themselves, the more I realized how completely they had bought into their own narrative. What followed was the most honest and painful conversation we had ever had. I didn't hold back, describing specific instances where their need for public validation had overshadowed my actual needs. I shared how it felt to be invisible in my own family, to be valued only for what I could contribute to their image. I explained how their conditional love had left me with a constant need for external validation and a fear of failure that had taken years to overcome. Their response was a mixture of denial and justification. They acknowledged that perhaps they had been overly focused on achievements, but insisted it was because they wanted the best for me. They couldn't see that their definition of the best had always been aligned with what looked good to others, not what was genuinely in my best interest. They admitted to being ambitious parents, but rejected the label of neglectful, pointing to the material advantages and opportunities they had provided. The breakthrough came when my mother, tears streaming down her face, finally admitted that she had been trying to live vicariously through me to achieve the recognition and validation she had missed in her own life. My father followed with a difficult confession. He had been so focused on building a reputation as a successful family man that he had lost sight of what it actually meant to be a father. These admissions didn't excuse their behavior, but they provided a context I had never considered before. The conversation ended not with resolution, but with understanding. We didn't magically heal decades of emotional distance in one evening, but we established a new foundation of honesty. I agreed to write something for the award application, but not the glowing tribute they had requested. Instead, I would write about the complex reality of our relationship, about parents who had high expectations and provided opportunities, but struggled with emotional connection, about a child who had learned to define success on his own terms. As I drove home that night, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The confrontation had been draining, but it had also broken through years of unspoken tension and resentment. For the first time, we had spoken honestly about our relationship, acknowledging both the good and the bad. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew something fundamental had shifted between us. The perfect family facade had cracked, and perhaps, in those cracks, something more authentic might eventually grow. The weeks following our difficult conversation brought subtle changes to my relationship with my parents. The initial awkwardness gradually gave way to a tentative honesty that had been missing throughout our lives together. I wrote the essay for the award application as promised, a nuanced reflection on growing up with high-achieving parents who valued public success but struggled with private emotional connection. To my surprise, they submitted it without requesting changes, though they didn't win the award. What they did with that essay, however, surprised me even more. They shared it with a family therapist they had begun seeing together, using it as a starting point for examining their patterns of behavior and their understanding of parenthood. The therapist, according to my mother, had helped them see that their need for external validation had overshadowed their ability to form genuine emotional connections with me and with each other. This revelation didn't instantly transform our relationship, but it created space for something new to develop. My parents began making awkward but genuine attempts to know me as a person rather than as a reflection of themselves. They asked about my work not to collect anecdotes for social conversations, but out of what seemed like real curiosity. They listened when I spoke about my friends, my hobbies, my hopes for the future, topics they had previously dismissed as irrelevant unless they enhanced their public image. The startup I worked for continued to grow, and I took on increasing responsibility in developing new products. When we secured a major contract with a school district serving low-income communities, I shared the news with my parents not because I expected praise, but because it was genuinely exciting to me. Their response was different from anything I had experienced before. No immediate attempt to claim credit or redirect the conversation to themselves, just a simple expression of pride in my accomplishment. My father's 60th birthday approached, and for the first time, I felt no pressure to perform or provide the perfect gift that would reflect well on their parenting. Instead, I invited them to visit me for a weekend, planning to show them my work and introduce them to my life as it actually existed. The invitation was met with hesitation and then acceptance, a small step but a significant one. During their visit, I gave them a tour of our offices and demonstrated the educational software we had developed. I watched as my father, ever the pragmatist, asked thoughtful questions about our business model and impact metrics. I saw my mother's expression soften as she watched videos of students using our products, their faces lighting up as concepts that had previously confused them suddenly made sense. For the first time, they seemed to see my work not as a career choice that reflected on them, but as something meaningful in its own right. That evening, over dinner at my favorite local restaurant, my mother shared something that brought our journey full circle. She told me that after our difficult conversation months earlier, she had gone through old photo albums and realized how many of our family memories were staged for public consumption. She had found only a handful of candid photos that captured genuine moments of connection between us. This realization had led her to start taking photos of everyday life, unposed, imperfect moments that told a more authentic story. As I listened, I recognized how far we had come. The perfection they had once sought in public had given way to an acceptance of imperfection in private. The performance had been replaced by something messy, but more real, a genuine attempt at connection after years of emotional distance. The following months brought continued progress, punctuated by occasional setbacks when old patterns resurfaced. My father still sometimes mentioned my achievements in conversations with his colleagues, but now he was more likely to follow up with how proud he was of the person I had become, not just what I had accomplished. My mother still organized community events, but she seemed to find more personal fulfillment in the work itself rather than in the recognition it brought. 2 years after our confrontation, I received an invitation to speak at a technology conference about the impact of educational software on underserved communities. As I prepare my presentation, I found myself reflecting on my journey, not just professionally but personally. I realized that my work creating tools to help others learn and grow had been influenced by my own experience of feeling unseen and misunderstood as a child. The night before my presentation, my parents called to wish me luck. The conversation was brief but warm, ending with my father saying something I had waited decades to hear. "We're proud of you, Kevin, not for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become." As I stood on the stage the next day, looking out at the audience, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. I had spent years seeking validation from people who could only see me as a reflection of themselves, then years rejecting their approval to prove my independence. Now, I had found a middle ground where I could appreciate their support without needing it to define my worth. My parents were in the audience that day, sitting not in the front row where they might be seen by important people, but toward the back where they could watch without drawing attention to themselves. As I finished my presentation and looked up, I saw them standing and applauding with genuine smiles, not the practiced expressions they had once worn for public occasions, but something more authentic, more vulnerable, more real. In that moment, I understood that our journey wasn't about reaching a destination of perfect family harmony, but about learning to navigate the complex terrain of relationships with honesty and compassion. My parents would probably always care somewhat about appearances, and I would probably always carry some scars from my childhood. But we had found a way to meet in the middle, to acknowledge both the good and the bad, to appreciate each other as flawed but evolving human beings. As I left the stage and walked toward them, I realized that this was what I had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not performance, but the simple, profound recognition of being seen and loved for who I truly was. And in that recognition, I had finally found the freedom to be myself, no longer living in the shadow of their expectations or defined by their need for validation. I was Kevin, a man with his own story to tell, no longer a prop in someone else's narrative, but the author of my own